I haven't looked at those programs in some years, and it's always amazing to see how powerful great music and artistry is when you see someone like Horowitz, who really was reborn with that concert. He had been, a few years before that, he had been written off by music critics. Even his own record company had thought he had no value left. And I remember trying to persuade the head of his record label at the time to come and listen to Horowitz, and he wouldn't even go to his living room to hear him. And then yet, 2 years later, he was reborn in Moscow, playing what was the greatest concert, in his opinion, of his life. In any event, that shows that, I guess, that there's nothing certain in art. Good morning. As the new general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, I'm very happy to be joining your ranks. I'm very grateful to Mark Skorka, the president of Opera America, for inviting me to speak this morning. I'd also like to thank Spate for permitting me to talk on his turf here in Seattle, since he rules here, as you obviously know. Around 30 years ago, in fact, long before Spate had begun his illustrious career as the general manager of the Seattle Opera, our professional paths first crossed. That was in 1972, and Spate was a young music critic for the New York Post, and I was a 19-year-old press agent trying to convince Spate to write articles about my clients, which was an eclectic mix of aging cabaret singers, anxious tenors, and the occasional circus performer. I don't recall whether or not Spate actually wrote about any of these artists, but I imagine that his early work as a music critic was an important part of his development in becoming one of the great opera house directors, which is an imprimatur that he richly deserves. Although I have not yet officially taken the reins at the Met, my profile has increased of late too, partly because, as the incoming general manager of the Met, I will be taking on a $220 million operating budget, which is somewhat daunting. It's the largest of any opera house in the world, and an uncertain box office which goes with it, an issue that we all face in the world of opera today. To meet such a monumental challenge, I have embarked on an ambitious and widely reported recovery plan for the Met. As you know, formerly I was the president of a commercial record label, and I have serendipitously discovered that as the incoming head of a beloved nonprofit institution, I have so far been mostly supported in my plans by the Met's observers and its fans. In preparation for my recent inaugural press conference on the stage of the Met, our archivist, Bob Tuggle, gave me a transcript of Rudolph Bing's inaugural press conference in 1950, at which he said, "What may be right now might have been quite wrong before, and what was right so far may be wrong in the future. The Metropolitan must adapt its methods to prevailing conditions of the day." That was Rudolph Bing in 1950. Bing's words ring just as true today and inspire my new plans for the Met and its future. Even though I was once a press agent, I didn't completely anticipate the avalanche of coverage in the New York Times and some of the other leading domestic and international newspapers and magazines that followed our press conference. I believe that the reason there was such a strong reaction was that I signaled the need for significant change to deal with the declining box office and opera's diminishing position in mainstream culture. And this is obviously a problem that all of you are facing and confronting, and why you're here in this conference. I announced a number of artistic and audience development initiatives designed to stimulate interest in the Met, to reinvigorate the art form, and to increase future ticket sales. In doing so, I emphasize my commitment to building upon the Met's already high musical standards, the greatest in the world in my opinion, of any repertory opera house, while furthering its theatrical standards as well. The job of general manager of the Met is, depending upon whom I've spoken to, either the most coveted job in the performing arts or the one most likely to lead to a nervous breakdown. I will ascend to the lofty position at some point between Joe Volpe's farewell gala on May 20th, which is coming up, and the beginning of our next fiscal year on August 1. As with many things under Joe's regime, the exact timing is up to him. As you all know, Joe has been one of the most forceful managers in the Met's illustrious history. I've known him since the mid-'80s, when he was the assistant manager of the Met, and I was the freelance producer of the Met's television broadcasts and radio programs, having been engaged by the general manager at that time, who was Bruce Crawford. Although it was reported in Johanna Fiedler's book, Molto Agitato, that in the 80s Joe once actually threatened to throw me across the Lincoln Center Plaza, our relationship today, for those of you who may be wondering, is cordial and collegial, although our approach to our work is not always alike. For example, Joe once famously told a leading and somewhat temperamental soprano, who shall remain nameless, who happened to hate the color of her wig and refused to wear it for a performance of Carmen. Joe said to her, "The wig is going on, with or without you." It's a true story. From that story, I learned that Joe and I have somewhat differing views about the importance of wigs. I received my fundamental training in the handling of divas as the manager of the late Vladimir Horowitz, one of the greatest and one of the most eccentric pianists of all time. Horowitz wouldn't play his concerts unless, as his contract stipulated, the temperature on the stage was exactly 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I can assure you that on concert days, I carried a thermometer with me just in case. Over the course of my career, I also managed or produced Herbert von Karajan, Luciano Pavarotti, Kathleen Battle, Jesse Norman, and many other artists with strong artistic temperaments. In perhaps my most fearless act as a young impresario, as you just saw a sample of it, I once conceived and produced a program of spirituals that brought Kathy Battle and Jesse Norman to sing in concert together on the same stage for the very first time. In working with all of these extraordinarily gifted artists, I learned how important it was to provide them with unwavering support, along with unlimited amounts of patience and understanding. In planning the Met's future, my extensive experience as a producer and manager has shaped my approach as well. Since the Met's reputation is based on its impeccable musical standards, I've invited James Levine, one of the greatest conductors in history, who has molded the Met's orchestra into a legendary ensemble that it is today, to remain at the Met for as long as he chooses to wield his baton. And my new production plans are designed to increase the frequency and concentration of the world's greatest singers at the Met, since the stars of today require the challenge of new productions to showcase their interpretive skills. By promising them a steady flow of new productions, I've secured commitments from opera stars such as Renee Fleming and Anna Netrebko and Angela Gheorghiu and Rolando Villazon to sing in 2 Met productions each season in the future, more than they sing at any other opera house in the world. It's through this kind of stimulating and hopefully thoughtfully conceived new productions that we will be able to replenish the standard repertoire and keep opera fresh and vibrant. To reach this goal, we can't operate like a museum that only presents existing works in old productions. And this is what I have to say not only to you, but to the members of the Metropolitan Opera Board, who need this kind of explanation as well. I'd also like to make it absolutely clear that Eurotrash productions, which is the bane of the Metropolitan Opera's board and its audience, are not on the Met horizon. I know that our audiences are too sophisticated and intelligent to tolerate such poorly conceived productions, and I don't like them either. In my recent travels, and I'm sure all of you, or many of you, travel and have seen samples of different types of productions and in your work. I've seen my share of them. And on one trip to Munich last year, as an example, I was invited by Zubin Mehta to sit in on the first stage and orchestra rehearsal of a new Rigoletto. I don't know if any of you have heard about this production. It was directed by a German film director who apparently drew her inspiration from science fiction films. And in fact, this production could just as easily have been retitled Rigoletto Meets the Planet of the Apes. It was set in a futuristic environment encrusted with the shattered remains of the world's most famous opera houses, including the Met. And the singers were dressed as apes, from furry head to furry toe. Not surprisingly, and within the opening minutes of the rehearsal, the distinguished and very talented tenor Ramon Vargas had the good taste to rip off his ape suit in disgust and walk off the stage, not to return. I'm happy to report that there will be no ape suits in our new productions of standard repertoire. For the past year, however, I've been meeting with many of the world's current great directors, most of whom have never worked at the Met before, but are eager to bring us their exciting theatrical visions. These are directors who have earned their reputations for being imaginative while also being faithful to the original opera librettos, honoring the music with their intelligent and inspired stage direction and designs. These directors include the visionary Robert Lepage, whose recent production for Cirque du Soleil, Ka, leaves audiences overwhelmed with pleasure. The great European directors such as Patrice Chéreau, Luc Bondy, Peter Stein, Willie Decker, great English directors such as Richard Eyre, Nick Heitner, Matthew Bourne, and great American theater directors such as Mary Zimmerman, Julie Taymor, Jack O'Brien, and Bartlett Sher. My goals are to build on the Met's great strengths of its orchestra, music director, and its reputation as the home of great voices, and to continue to faithfully serve our loyal audience while concurrently reconnecting the Met to a broader public with a multifaceted effort to restore the Met's musical and theatrical dominance, excitement, and glamour. An easy task. Our methods of accomplishing these goals are dramatically increasing the number of new productions to 7 per season from the current average of 4. 2, placing a greater emphasis on securing more performances per season from the world's greatest singers. 3, making a strong commitment to producing contemporary work on an annual basis, including our new commissioning program with Lincoln Center Theater. 4, creating new media initiatives with the digital distribution of our live performances to our global audience via movie theaters, new broadband subscription programming services, downloads, DVDs, CDs, free television, and radio. 5, producing an annual family entertainment opera during the winter holidays, beginning with next season's English language abridged version of the Julie Taymor production of The Magic Flute. 6, following in the tradition of the Met's history with Chagall and David Hockney, rebuilding ties to the world of leading contemporary visual artists with a gallery space at the Met containing new works inspired by next season's repertoire. And finally, 7, lifting the veil of formality that envelops the Met without reducing its glamorous appeal by opening rehearsals to the general public and developing greater and more significant audience education and outreach programs inside and outside of our building that are informal and accessible. I believe these are logical and essential steps, newsworthy because of their magnitude and because they are a significant departure from what in recent years had become the norm at the Met. That's why we will open our new season on September 25th with a new production, Anthony Minghella's brilliant Madame Butterfly, the first new production to open a Met season in 20 years. And that's why by the time the 09-010 season rolls around, the Met will be presenting 7 new productions annually. My first press conference at the Met last February took place on stage in front of an audience of 100 journalists and as many Met board members and supporters. It had been 16 months since my appointment was announced in the fall of 2004. And as I said, I'm still not the general manager yet. Although the Met had been seeking a successor to Joe Volpe for almost a year and hadn't called me, the search committee of the board moved swiftly once it had met with me. In fact, after my first interview, I ended up signing a contract in 48 hours. Although several, I know you can count on Opera America. Although several close friends in the industry warned me at the time that I would have to be crazy to take on such a formidable challenge, I believe that my career has been on this singular course from its very beginning. Although I was a part-time usher at the Met when I was 16, I had musical, if not operatic, blood flowing through my veins from birth. My great-uncle was Jascha Heifetz, a violinist, and my family still tells me the story that while I was in the hospital as an infant, a newborn infant, Heifetz held a vibrating tuning fork to my ear to check for signs of innate virtuosity. It's the kind of family I come from. My mother informs me that I failed the test, sadly. However, undaunted by this early setback, I entered the world of music full-time upon my graduation from high school. Although years later I also attended Yale briefly, I obtained a job upon graduation from high school as the assistant mailroom boy for Saul Hurok, the legendary impresario. My immediate superior was the 80-year-old chief mailroom boy, Scotty Bolton, who was very fond of complaining that Mr. Hurok had short arms and deep pockets. Then came my stint as a publicist, which I explained was where Spate and I had our formidable experiences together, and where, as I gained experience, my client list grew to include Carnegie Hall and the Metropolitan Opera's ballet presentations. In 1978, I was hired by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I became its assistant manager and forged a lifetime friendship with its music director, Seiji Ozawa, who at my invitation will return to the Met for only the second time in his career to conduct Pique Dame in 2008, and then The Damnation of Faust, directed by Robert Lepage in 2009. While working at the Boston Symphony, I was responsible for organizing its historic tour under Ozawa to China at the end of the Cultural Revolution in early 1979. Having secured from Pan Am the first 747 to ever fly into China, and with its cabin full of musicians and journalists, we arrived in a Beijing landscape almost unimaginable today. No cars, no skyscrapers, the entire population dressed in Mao suits. I observed the seeds of an historical transformation firsthand. Our newly empowered but naive host from the Ministry of Culture, embracing capitalistic principles previously forbidden and unknown, insisted upon a profit-sharing contract, even though it was a completely inapplicable concept considering that there were no profits to be had. However, as I recall, in order to avoid offending the Chinese officials, I diligently drew up a handwritten document on tissue paper thin hotel stationery, documenting that there would be 50% sharing of profits or losses, which my Chinese hosts very proudly signed. It may very well have been their first contract. In 1981, I joined Columbia Artists Management, where I started a new television and film division called Cami Video, which is how I first met and worked with Jimmy Levine. It was then that I also became the manager of Vladimir Horowitz. In 1986, I organized Horowitz's historic return to Russia, which you saw a brief excerpt of a moment ago. Although Horowitz was a practical man in some ways, he once said, for example, in response to a question about the acoustics of a new concert hall, "If the check is good, the acoustics are good." His obsession with his diet appeared to be the major hurdle to realizing his dream of returning to Russia. At that time, and this is what managers have to worry about, at that time his evening meal consisted exclusively of fresh Dover sole and asparagus, a routine repeated night after night for several years, and all faithfully recorded in a bound red diary that he kept on his living room coffee table. Horowitz was convinced he could not survive without this specific menu. And his return to Russia ultimately took place because, through the combined diplomatic efforts of the English ambassador and the U.S. Secretary of State, we were able to ensure the daily airlift of his fresh fish. Fortified by Dover sole, Horowitz's concerts in Moscow were perhaps the pinnacle of his career. In a television program that I produced, the event was broadcast live to an audience of tens of millions of fans throughout the world. Around the same time that I was managing Horowitz's return to Russia, I was appointed to run the Met's media department on a freelance basis. During the late 80s and the early 90s, I produced 25 Met television programs, including the Met's historic Ring Cycle, which I also helped to finance through television pre-sales in Europe and Japan. It ran on 4 consecutive nights, making it the first cultural strip programming event in the history of public television. Now, today, sadly, public television is not a viable venue for primetime broadcasts of opera programming. Through these productions, I became a close colleague of James Levine and soon marveled at his amazing skill in working with singers. His brilliance went well beyond his incomparable conducting technique. He was a singer's dream of a conductor, a one-man support system, part incomparable maestro, and the other part sympathetic psychotherapist. Through his enthusiastic ministrations, James nurtured once-in-a-lifetime performances out of great singers and great performances out of merely good singers. Guiding singers carefully through the rehearsal process, he ensured that their peak performances would come at just the right moment, whether it was an opening night of a new production or a Saturday radio matinee or a live television broadcast. He was the conductor I turned to in 1990 when I dreamed up of a concert of spirituals at Carnegie Hall featuring Kathleen Battle and Jesse Norman, whose somewhat complicated personas belied Marian Anderson's innocent televised introduction of them as these 2 girls. In the ensuing years, I produced Julie Taymor's first opera, Oedipus Rex, assembling an opera company from scratch to perform it in the Japanese Alps, commissioned and produced Tan Dun's music for the 1997 handover of Hong Kong to China, made a film about Claudio Abbado with the dismantling of the Berlin Wall as the backdrop, produced the music by John Corigliano for the Academy Award-winning movie The Red Violin, and produced foreign orchestra tours for European and American orchestras, including ones with the Philadelphia Orchestra and Riccardo Muti. The connection I drew upon when I invited Muti to make his future conducting debut at the Met. In 9/10, he will be conducting a new production of Attila at the Met. In 1987, Von Karajan granted me permission to make the first and what turned out to be the only film about his life over which he did not exert his own complete artistic control, a sample of which you saw a few minutes ago. At the time, Karajan was old, but still the most powerful classical musician in Europe, dividing his empire between Berlin and the Salzburg Festival. The ground rules for my film were simple. We would film him every day over a 5-week period in Salzburg, providing a contemporary portrait of the conductor at work, but avoiding his past, which included his membership in the Nazi Party. I was concerned that these filming restrictions, would result in a whitewash of this dark chapter in his history. Fortunately, one day we filmed Karajan receiving a Golden Tuning Fork Prize from an Austrian record magazine. As the cameras were rolling, Karajan described his close relationship with the Vienna Philharmonic. He offered as an example the previous day's rehearsal, in which he had grown so frustrated and angry with the musicians that he told them that he would like to tie a rope around them, pour gasoline over them, and light a match. This stunning revelation satisfied my need for a balanced film. And interestingly, when Karajan saw the film for the first time, when that scene unfolded, he chuckled. In 2000, I produced a Three Tenors Christmas concert with Pavarotti, Domingo, and Carreras, negotiating with Pavarotti, who at the time was convinced that the Italian tax authorities were eavesdropping on him. In fact, he made me check my cell phone at the door by silently tracing contractual figures with our fingers on his kitchen table in Pesaro. Not an easy way to negotiate. These experiences, spread out over 3 decades, constitute some of my training for the position of General Manager of the Metropolitan Opera. As a producer all of my adult life, my approach to running the Met will be to continue to being a hands-on producer, directing both the artistic and the business plans. I don't think there's any other way to do it. It's not the way the Met has been run since Rudolph Bing, but I believe it's how it needs to be run now in order to meet the challenges that we face. I've structured the Met's future seasons with the purpose of securing the company's artistic and box office success. The 09-10 and 10-11 seasons, the first seasons that I've been able to plan from scratch, in collaboration with James Levine, are a good reflection of how we expect to achieve this success. In 9-10, a season with 7 new productions, we will open with a new Tosca for Carita Mattila, conducted by James Levine. Her first interpretation of the role, the opera will showcase her considerable musical and dramatic gifts, which have won her such acclaim in her recent portrayal of Salome. We will mount a new Carmen for Angela Gheorghiu, an amazing singing actress who will play the role for the first time, with James Levine at the podium. The production will be co-directed by Richard Eyre and Matthew Bourne, the dynamic team who created one of the biggest hits of London's West End this past season, Mary Poppins. I'm particularly excited about the new Tales of Hoffmann, to be directed by Luc Bondy, with what I consider to be the dream cast for this opera. Rolando Villazon, Anna Netrebko, singing all the soprano roles, and Renee Papa. I traveled to Europe in pursuit of these artists, and as part of my efforts to entice Anna to play the 4 heroines for the first time, I plied her with Wiener Schnitzel at the Imperial Hotel in Vienna. Sometimes the life of the general manager-elect isn't so bad. I also spent 6 months tracking down Riccardo Muti to convince him to make his Met debut in February 2010. I'm very glad that La Scala's loss is our gain. In the 2010-11 season, which is right around the corner in terms of opera scheduling, as you know, we will launch our new Ring cycle. Director Robert Lepage will be true to the mythological epic by setting it in a naturalistic environment inspired by the volcanic topography of ancient Iceland. Lepage's ability to create theatrical splendor through projections and new stage technology makes him the ideal 21st century successor to the Zeffirelli spectacles of the 20th century. To flourish in the 21st century, we must demonstrate the modern appeal of opera through additional creative initiatives. That's the reasoning behind our plans to commission new works, to create a contemporary visual art program, and to deliver our operas to the world via the digital electronic highway. Through my experience working in the record and film industry, I've watched the technological revolution with keen interest. With the agreement of our unions, with whom we are currently engaged in positive discussions, and hopefully to conclude our discussions with them within the coming weeks, we will take advantage of these new technological developments in order to instantly and effectively reach a global audience. While classical record labels continue to decline and PBS and foreign broadcasters have eliminated most of the programming of full-length operas, many new opportunities have emerged in their place. With our loyal radio fan base of 2.5 million listeners in the U.S. and another 7 million more internationally already in place as a receptive audience, we will designate 6 of next season's Saturday matinee radio broadcasts as high-definition audiovisual transmissions. Like the rolling out of a new movie, these live transmissions will be seen simultaneously across the country in several hundred movie theaters equipped with high-definition projection systems, a very real concept thanks to a recent technological development, as well as on home entertainment systems via the Internet. I've seen photographs from the 1950s when Met radio broadcasts were at their peak in popularity. Local communities gathered together in high school gymnasiums to listen to the Saturday matinee broadcast was a common phenomenon. Now, in the 21st century, the new generation of opera lovers in Cincinnati or in Kansas City will be able to collectively enjoy the opera at their hometown movie theaters with giant screens, state-of-the-art sound, and subtitles. Some weeks after the initial transmissions, DVDs and CDs will become commercially available in stores as well. While maintaining our series of free live Saturday radio broadcasts, we are also planning a nightly Metropolitan Opera channel that will be carried via the Internet on a subscription basis or, as an alternative, by subscription satellite radio. We're negotiating possibilities with both. This new audio channel will feature 4 live and 3 archival performances each week of the season. On the Internet, we will also offer subtitles and the possibility of commercial downloads. We will also be updating the contents of the non-performance portions of the transmissions with live interviews with the artists and livelier behind-the-scenes features. Our intention is to make our coverage as animated and informative for opera fans as the broadcast of a Yankee playoff game is for sports fans. And we will continue, I should let you all know, to offer the opera quiz, which is sacred to our loyal audience. Our program to emphasize the work of brilliant contemporary visual art is designed to create a bridge between the world of opera and modern art. So far, 6 leading artists, and others are being added as I speak literally, have provided works that will hang in a gallery space in the south lobby of the Met. Inspired by the opera heroines featured in next season's new productions, these new works, created by some of the most brilliant contemporary artists, including John Curran's figurative portrait of Helen of Troy from Egyptische Helena, Cecily Brown's rich interpretation of Suor Angelica, and Richard Prince's edgy Madame Butterfly. My hope is that out of this new and stimulating collaboration, we will find the next Hackney or Chagall, and will create scenery, who will create scenery for one of our future productions. Our new commissioning program, which has been reported, between the opera, consists of the opera theater commissions of the Met and Lincoln Center Theater, will provide the opportunity to nurture important composers and dramatists and librettists in the creation and development of new works. I believe that this program addresses a shortcoming inherent in the usual opera commissioning process, in which not enough dramaturgical assistance or development time is provided to ensure musical and theatrical success. By extensively workshopping these new works, and we've commissioned 9 of them with the resources of our 2 institutions, we hope to guide new works to the stages of both the Beaumont Theater and the Met that will be both musically appealing and well-conceived theatrically. The collaboration between Lincoln Center Theater and the Met is the first meaningful artistic project between 2 Lincoln Center constituents, a milestone in itself. The composers and librettists who we are commissioning include Adam Gettle, Jake Heggie, Michael Accusa, Wynton Marsalis, Janine Tesori, working together with Tony Kushner, Michael Torque, Rufus Wainwright, and Scott Wheeler. Our commitment to important contemporary work will also be realized through the Met's presentation of John Adams' new masterpiece, Dr. Atomic, in 2008, a revival of John Corigliano's classic, The Ghost of Versailles, in 2009, and a new commission from the brilliant Argentinian composer Osvaldo Golijov, who will compose his first large-scale opera for the Met in 2010. New work, properly conceived and developed, is an essential ingredient in keeping the art form of opera alive and appealing. These are my plans to make opera thrive once again at the Met. It's certainly possible that not every one of these initiatives that I've described today will be successful. I'm prepared for that. But I believe that it's essential for the Met to take action in a broad way now. When I was an usher at the Met long ago, I dreamed that someday I might become its general manager. And now, 35 years later, I'm having a very exhilarating time preparing for this challenge. When Rudolf Bing began his tenure back in 1950, he stated, "I will attempt to run this house on the principle of quality only. I plan to make that my credo as well." Thank you very much.